Hello folks, welcome back to Ben in Berlin. Today we're going to explore the Holocaust Memorial, or its full name, the Memorial for the Murdered Jews of Europe. We're going to find out why this was built, why it's controversial for some today, and just generally explore the area as well. So folks, this is the Holocaust Memorial, or the Memorial for the Murdered Jews of Europe, and it's 2,711 concrete pillars designed by an American architect called Peter Eisenman. It opened in 2005, construction started about 2 years before that, and it followed a 10-year debate in the German government about whether they would build a memorial in the center of Berlin. But what I thought we could do today, folks, is I'll explain now a little bit about the history, or brief history, of the Holocaust, because it is such an important subject we should never forget. And then I think it'll be good for you guys to walk through the memorial and get a feel for what the architect was trying to convey with this site. And then on the other side, we can have a small chat about what he was trying to achieve, because the architects never really said much about this, and that's really an important part of it. But let's run through the history. The Holocaust took place during the Second World War, and when people ask the question, well, how did it get to the point where humans were murdering other humans for the basis of religion? And that's a very deep question, but in terms of how it took place in Germany, there are lots of very good historians who've looked back, and some argue that the darkness was visible all the way back to the time of Otto von Bismarck. So you're talking the 1800s. But we won't go too much in depth in that area in this video. But what we'll run through is what the Nazis and Hitler did in that terrible time. So in 1933, Hitler won his supermajority, and he then got to work with banning all political parties and banning all trade unions. They basically wanted no opposition. And the Jews were targeted as a group that they needed to persecute for various deep reasons in the ideology of the Nazi Party. So the way it started was trying to stop German people from shopping. So the idea being that if you shopped in a Jewish shop, you were a bad German, basically. And then it really accelerated from there in terms of darkness and in terms of horror. On the 10th of May 1934, you had the burning of the books, and this took place all over Germany, but also in Berlin. You can still visit the site today, just off Unter den Linden, on now called Babelplatz, and that's where books were taken out from the libraries, and in Berlin they were taken out by the university students and placed on the square and set on fire. They were perhaps written by Jewish authors or had ideology that went against that of the Nazis. At the time in Berlin, Joseph Goebbels, the propaganda minister, actually made a speech at the time. What we think they were trying to do here was eradicate the history of these people before going on to obviously try and eradicate the people themselves. In 1935, at the Nuremberg race laws, they put down on paper basically taking away the rights and citizenship of Jewish people. Then in late 1939, the Nazis did an experiment, and they murdered 70,000 German people because they were disabled. So this is before they started to murder the Jewish people. And it was actually the Catholic Church that rose up in Germany and said, this is wrong, You cannot murder people because they are disabled. And what this meant was that by 1941, when the killing started of Jewish people, but also Roma and Sinti people, formerly known as gypsies, homosexuals as well, they knew they couldn't do it in the eyes of the world, and so they hid their camps deep into Germany and deep into Poland, and that's when the mass murdering truly started. In 1942 at the Wannsee Conference, the Nazi Party put down a strategy for eradicating Jewish people. They actually put down on paper almost a business plan of how they were going to achieve this, and then they got to their nasty work. If we take Berlin as an example, by 1943 Berlin was declared of all Jewish people. There were some hiding, but on official records it was free of Jews, and 2/3 of them perished in the camps, in the concentration and extermination camps. By the end of the Holocaust, the end of the Second World War, 6 million Jews had been murdered during that horrific time in the world's history. Some historians actually debate that number. They say it's far too simplified, and there are some who even argue that in total, if you include all the murders of Jewish people around the world, you're looking at potentially double that number, and that 12 million were murdered during that time. But that is a view that's debated. But then you come to modern day Berlin. The reason why it wasn't addressed till recent times is that the way historians have viewed it is that in the 50s and 60s, you still had a generation who many had been Nazis. So if we take an example of doctors, many of the leading doctors, or the majority of doctors in Germany, were members of the Nazi Party. Whether they felt they had to, or whether they believed in the party, is a question for debate. But it wasn't really until the 70s when the next generation came along and they questioned their grandparents and their parents. And that's when Germany, we believe, started to realize that it had to accept their history. And there's probably been no country who've accepted it in this way. And that's why this incredible memorial was constructed. But what we can do now is have a walk through the memorial and just think about what I've just been saying, and then maybe have a little think about what you believe Peter Eisenman, the architect, was trying to convey with this particular memorial, because he's never actually said in great detail what it is. And part of that thinking is up to you as the individual to make your own view of it. So we've just walked through the 2,711 concrete pillars, or stones, or indeed graves, as some people call them. And it's good to take a few moments just to reflect upon what it was you just went through. I first went through here in January 2019, and it was very cold, starting to snow, and I reached the middle of this memorial, and I was very cold inside, and you may say that's partly due to the weather. I walked through this in the height of summer, so right now it's July, although it's not as warm as it usually is, but certainly last year, late 20s, early 30s in terms of degrees, and I've had equally the same feeling of coldness during the summer. And that makes you start to think about what Peter Eisenman was trying to convey with this. Some of the most common answers you get is, as I just mentioned, these are like gravestones. The highest pillars in the center are 16 feet. But then also on the outskirts of the memorial, so there's one just here in front of me, and it's completely flat but in the ground. And so the idea is, could they represent fully grown adults who were murdered, and perhaps the flat stones here are babies, or indeed even unborn babies who were murdered. But some of the common things people talk about when they walk through here are you feel like an individual. So you tend to walk through on your own. It is a memorial, and a strange thing occurs when you're in there, and you don't often see people crossing in front of you. You're not often following someone. You feel very alone, very isolated. The colour of the stones, this grey, some people say that's the ash of those who were murdered and then burnt. As you walk through, you feel like you're in an enclosed world. It's very putting pressure down on you, especially in the centre where the columns are at the highest. There's no central point, so you can feel like you're getting lost, or there's nowhere you're journeying to. But all of these may be correct answers. It's for the individual to decide. The main reason behind this is it's one of remorse and regret. It's ensuring that people of the modern world never forget that inescapable part of Germany's history. We must never forget this, because we must ensure it never happens again. And that's all the feelings we think the architect was trying to convey when he designed this. And it was controversial, and remains controversial today. The part back when it was debated in the 90s and into the noughties were things like the site. So I believe this site is really important. The Reichstag and the Brandenburger Tor are just a few minutes walk over in that direction. Behind you guys, behind the camera, is Potsdamer Platz, an area of now today great wealth, an industry. Behind us, with the green roof just behind my head there, is the Hotel Adlon, famous 5-star hotel. So in terms of real estate, this site is probably worth billions of euros. But they chose to put this memorial in the centre of the city. And that's a really incredible part of it as well. They could have built anything here. This area was wasteland, I should point out. The Berlin Wall ran just on this side, and so this was very close to the Berlin Wall, and nothing was really built here, and very uneven as well. That's another point I should have mentioned. As you walk through this, you never feel like you're on even ground. You're always slightly off balance, and we think that's part of what they were trying to convey as well. Also over on this side in the Tiergarten, we've got two other memorials. One is for homosexuals who were also murdered during the Holocaust, and then a little bit further on is for the Sinti and Romani people who were murdered as well. This is, or has been described as a place of no meaning. That's also part of it. And I hope you guys have got an inkling or an idea of why this is so important. If you do visit Berlin and would like to find out more, on the far side, where that construction work, sort of behind this tree where the construction work is taking place, there is an exhibition, or a permanent exhibition, and it's free to enter, and it's all about the Holocaust. It's actually underground, so it's underneath some of this site. One of the first things you see in there is 6 large pictures of 6 individual Jewish people of all different ages, and that's to emphasize the 6 million Jews who were murdered during that time. You then go through to other rooms which detail the stories of those who were murdered during that time, their last thoughts, last letters, their accounts of what was taking place to them and their world. You also in there have the Room of Sights, and that details the many, many locations where the Holocaust took place around Europe. It wasn't just in Germany. You have to remember the Nazis and Hitler were spreading vastly across Europe. And so you can find all about that down there. I think It's closed on Mondays. Museums tend to close on Mondays in Berlin. I believe it is now open, but you're never quite sure, obviously, with the pandemic. And it's really fascinating down there. And if you want to find out more, it's worth it. I should also mention the modern day controversial part of this is what you can and can't do here. So there are some security guards who will tell you to be careful if you're jumping between the pillars or running around. Some people argue you shouldn't come here and, as I'm doing now, sit on the stones. I understand that from the point of view of if it was a grave or something like this, but part of what the architect said is that you should be allowed to walk around and move between the stones. So it is a bit difficult to interpret. I think it's just a case of being sensible, and obviously you can't drink here and you shouldn't smoke here. There are some information boards literally in the ground which detail in German and English what you can and can't do. But folks, that is the Holocaust Memorial, or the memorial for the murdered Jews of Europe. I hope you found this interesting. I hope it came across in a way that I don't want to convey my personal thoughts onto this. I'd rather you experience it for yourselves and not make your own judgment, because that sounds far too formal, but just have a think about why Germany and Berlin have been so sensible and sensitive to never forgetting what took place on these lands not too long ago. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you guys very soon. Cheers.